I was working too much. I was not taking care of myself. All of a sudden I was like, I'm like not invincible. I need to kind of do something. And I was having like extreme panic attacks and I couldn't stop them. So it was the first time in my life I had never been able to handle the anxiety part. And you're like, who am I? Like, whose life is this? Because it was almost like I was like, this wasn't really me, because I wasn't drinking every single day. When I did, I noticed the impact on my mental health, and I had never noticed that until like 37 years old. I remember I was like sitting in our bedroom and I was crying and I couldn't stop crying, and I'm worried I'm going to kill myself. Like, if you're where I was, like, I'm telling you, you can recover. Just is one decision that you have to make. Yeah. As I dealt with those things, it was the realization that I used food and alcohol to cope with everything. It's like you have to find the root of the problem. You're like, well, when I get this promotion, I'll be happy. Or when this happens, then I'll feel happy. And then you get all those things and you're like, there's something else. I have completely realigned with like what my beliefs and values are. I feel stable.
All right, welcome back, Wellness Ninjas, to another episode of the Wellness Dojo Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Craik, and today I'm really excited to have somebody on the show who's actually like a close friend of mine, somebody who I've known for a really long time and has been on their very own mental health journey, and here to share a little bit about that and a little bit about some awareness apparel that you have going on. So welcome to the show, Danielle Wilson.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have you here. Always fun to have somebody who's like been like a longtime friend on the show too, so we can just kind of sit back and kick it. But I'm also really excited for you to be able to share your story with everybody as well. And we have our special friend Kiva
I like
here.
Dogs.
Yeah.
Like
so
me.
Tell me a little bit about your passion for dogs first. Let's kind of break the ice with that one.
Okay. So kind of over the last little like year or bit, we had rescued our own dog from a local rescue, Pause for Change. And then kind of in this whole journey thing, I was like, I want to do like some sort of volunteering or something like that. So we started fostering dogs. So we're on number 5 right now. So but I also have that rescue line too, which we can talk about later. But,
yeah. So you have actually like 5 dogs in your house
right now?
No. Okay.
So this is the 5th one we've had. The other 4 have been adopted out, which is the harder part of fostering. So luckily the majority of them have stayed in touch with me, so I can see updates and stuff like that. So but just volunteering and that kind of thing with Pause for Change, which has been super fun.
Yeah, oftentimes when I hear of like people fostering dogs, in my mind I think of like a house just like filled with dogs.
That's what I would love to have. But I have a husband that kind of reins that in. So I'm allowed one at a time. And if we fail on one of them, I probably won't be able to foster anymore. But yeah, so. Well, balance is key. It is, yes. And honestly, like it's a little busy with multiple dogs. So especially when one of them's a puppy.
And like for me, like my dog Kiva here, who's probably on screen right now, but like she's been like a real therapy for me actually in a lot of ways. Yeah. Is that the same for you with dogs? Yeah, I noticed kind of through the whole thing that like my dog was very much, especially when I was having really bad struggles with anxiety attacks. I said he was just kind of a therapy dog that wasn't official, because they just seem to sense it when something's not right, and he's kind of been right by my side through all of it. And then with the dogs, I've noticed that it's just really good for my mental health when they're there. I'm like, puppies just make me really happy, and you can't tell me that being around a puppy doesn't improve your mood overall. So yeah, I know I've had times where I'm just feeling really sad or I'm just down in the dumps, and it's crazy how they are just so intuitive. And she'll just come over, and she's not normally like a cuddly type of dog. Like if you start to cuddle with her, she just goes and gets a toy. That's what I know. That's what ours does too. Yeah, but that's Maverick. She will come up and just rest her head on your lap and just kind of make
She's
you
like,
feel
I think
good.
you're nervous.
Yeah, right?
Like, so sorry.
She senses it.
It's the energy, yeah.
But, okay, so I want to talk about your mental health journey as a whole. But can we let's just like go from the start of like, where did your mental health journey kind of begin?
This time?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, mental health kind of has been a bit of a journey my whole life.
I guess let me rephrase the question for you just to be like, I guess a little bit more specific for you. But like, when did you start to realize that your mental health was like needing healing?
That would have been 2022. So around that time, I had just been diagnosed with ADHD. I can't play right now. So I had just been diagnosed with ADHD at 36. So there was a lot of unexpected emotion and stuff that came with that, I think. And it was a lot of that realization that it wasn't me. Like it was, so then that kind of started this unraveling in a sense. So it was probably around June. I was in a really stressful role. I was working too much. I was not taking care of myself. My physical self was like, my doctor, we had gone and done all these tests and I had all these things wrong with me. And it was just like, all of a sudden I was like, I'm like not invincible. I need to kind of do something. And it just kind of, at that point, my mental health was really fragile. And there was a couple of small things that happened that just kind of set me down this like path of undoing, I guess is the best way to put it. Or like I had talked before about like the cracks in the foundation and how I had been already not very strong. So I got to the point where I was having like extreme panic attacks. And I couldn't stop them. So it was the first time in my life I had never been able to handle the anxiety part. I had struggled more with the depression because that's a harder beast, I find. But the anxiety got to a point where it was affecting everything. And so my doctor said, like, I think you need to step away from work and stuff and really just focus on your health. And so that's kind of when that started.
Yeah. You mentioned there's like a lot of small pieces that were kind of chipping away and like cracking away at the foundation. Like what were some of the specific pieces that you started to notice?
I feel like COVID was a big part of that. In a lot of conversations I've had, like I've talked to so many people and it seems like our generation, COVID was like the first time we stopped. Because when we were young, it was like the internet came and everything was just fast. And we just never really stopped. And we still had that mentality of like, get married, have the kids, get the job, get the house kind of thing. So that's what I was trying to do in COVID. When we kind of stopped, I was like, what the frick am I doing here? Like it was like that moment that you just kind of stopped and you're like, who am I? Like, whose life is this? Because it was almost like I was like, this wasn't really me. Like it was, I had checked all the boxes and done all the things that everybody else had said I needed to do. And when I finally slowed down, I realized how broken I really was and that I had been covering it with, being the mom and getting the promotions and doing the things and then drinking. Like alcohol was a huge thing. And I realized it more during COVID because everybody I think was drinking more. And, but then I was like, I don't think I could not have a drink if I wanted to. So that was a scary realization too. So I think, COVID just kind of started the unraveling a bit. And then it was just kind of the diagnosis of ADHD and then trying to wrap my head around like who Danielle was, because all of these things that I had grown up believing about me and like my faults and those narratives and things were literally all because my brain was different from everybody else's. And that was a huge thing. Yeah.
I think the pandemic in general really forced us to shine a spotlight on like our intimate lives, right? Especially like all this time that we were spending, like for lack of a better term, like between four walls, right? It really did just like force us to see our lives under a microscope, in a sense, right? Which was scary for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people now are still just starting to kind of feel that and like start to understand.
It took a minute. Yeah. Like I've had so many conversations with people about just like their journeys and stuff that COVID kind of triggered, and they're all kind of in this like same age group, and it was just like that same generation that just never really stopped.
Yeah. Yeah, and the alcohol piece too, I found that to be really interesting as well, because like myself as well, I was drinking more than I'd ever drank in my life before.
Because there was literally nothing else to do. You couldn't go out. There was anxieties and unknowns, and you didn't really know like anything else to do with it, right? Like, so it was just kind of, and working from home, that became my commute. So like that was the cutoff for me, is like I stopped work and grabbed a beer or grabbed a glass of wine, and then I was like, now I'm home, right? Because you were working from home. So yeah, I'm gonna take that.
Yeah, it became like really socially acceptable, I think, too.
Yeah,
like it more so, like, I mean, by no means is alcohol necessarily like bad or should be deemed like shameful or anything like that, but it became more almost like a joke or like an escape for people, more than ever before, I think, too, right?
And it was normal. Like we were going on like Zoom calls and just drinking with each other. Yeah. And I was like, no one had to commute. You didn't have to take a cab. Like there was it just became that like coping. But then there was that realization too, with all the alcohol and stuff. I was like, I don't think I could not. Yeah. But then I just kind of kept that to myself. I'm like, we're just not going to tell anybody that part. But it's in the back of your mind, like,
yeah.
Yeah. So.
And how did you kind of manage that piece of it? Like, was that like a realization that like a switch went off and you were like, I need to stop this? Or like, how was that process?
I think the drinking part just kind of naturally happened, but it wasn't until I started doing the work and had that full, like, I think of it as like the tower came down. So like whatever I had built around myself as like a shield or the masks or being that Danielle that I was supposed to be for everybody else, that's what came down. And what was left was like this like shell of me, right? And so once I started like piecing that together, that's when like the alcohol kind of slowing down. I noticed that I wasn't drinking every day, or because like stress had changed and things like that. And then it was like I realized more, because I wasn't drinking every single day. When I did, I noticed the impact on my mental health, and I had never noticed that until like 37 years old, because I had never stopped. Yeah. Because I had started that at like a young age, like as a teenager, realizing that it was something that helped, right? Yeah. It helped you kind of like be inside your own head and cope with things. And our generation, it was a normal thing to do. Like the booze was a big thing for us. So
yeah, I find it really interesting too, because oftentimes we think we need to attack like the coping mechanism head on. But it just like never seems to work. I see it with people with like diet is a really good example of it for like everyday life, where it's like, you know, that the problem is that, you know, maybe somebody says like, the problem is I need to lose weight. Well, I'm going to attack like the diet head on, but nobody won't, like, people have a really hard time going to the foundational pieces, which is like what you were saying. It's like, yeah, the alcohol just kind of became less when I started to do the underground work. Yeah. So can we talk a little bit about that underground work?
Yeah. So I should probably go to like January of last year. So I'd been going through my thing, had been off of work. Things didn't necessarily go as planned. Like originally it was going to be like a 3-month leave. but I didn't necessarily get the support that was needed when I was in crisis. So it was longer, and it ended up being a time away from my career because I had to get healthy again. And so in January of last year, I kind of hit a breaking point. So I had been managing to kind of hold things together, I think, and like going to therapy and doing the work and that kind of thing. But my mental illness wasn't getting any better. And so around January of last year, it got really, really bad. And I had early in January, I remember I was like sitting in our bedroom and I was crying and I was like, couldn't stop crying. And that's usually like, so I've had like depression bouts throughout my whole life since I was a teenager. So usually when I get to the point of like, when I can't stop crying, like things are really bad. And that's usually my indicator, right? So I was sitting there and my husband came up and he was like, what's going on? And I basically told him like, I'm worried I'm going to kill myself. And he was like just blank stare, right? He's like, sorry, what? Because like your wife comes to you and says that. It's like, so I was like, I don't trust myself right now. I'm like ready. I was ready to check myself in somewhere, but I was like, I'm going to say something to somebody first. Advice. So I was like, don't let me drink. Don't let me out of your sight. I'm like, don't let me like be home alone. Like I did not trust myself at that point. And it was a very scary situation because I just didn't know what I was going to do. And I hadn't really been in that point, but I had just kind of reached a point of, I just didn't know what else to do. I had reached that like hopeless. I was like, there's nothing left. Like I have nothing left, to no more fight left. And so it was not a good, not a good time. Like it's hard to talk about because it's to go back there and like kind of see yourself outside of it. You're like, holy shit.
Yeah. Which is also a super powerful tool to be able to use to like step outside and almost detach yourself from that, I guess, version of you. Right.
Because now when I'm going back, I'm looking back at it from a very different place. But it's sad. It's sad to think, to see yourself there and know that what that desperation kind of, I don't know, anyone who's kind of has struggled with depression or anything like that before kind of gets that, like, that feeling of like, I don't really have anything left. I don't know what to do. Yeah. So, at that point, Matt was kind of like, all right, so we're going to phone the doctor. And there was like this, he was like, you got to go. Right. So that's kind of what started the next phase.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had really good support around you in terms of your husband. It sounds like he did all the right things and was just there for you and like accepted that this is who you are right now and let's just work on it, which is really powerful. But I also know that it's unique to everybody. Like other people who have been in similar situations of, you know, not knowing whether they want to keep going or not. I think it looks unique to everybody. I'm curious if you're okay with it, if we can go into a little bit of just like what kind of led to that. Like, was it a feeling, you said like you didn't feel like you had any fight left. Was that a feeling of like feeling lost and like, I don't know which direction I'm going, so why bother? Or was it more a matter of like, I'm just like so tired of fighting the mental health side of it, like the anxiety and the feeling low, and like, what's the point of continuing to try this if it's not getting any better? Or
I think it was like a combination. I think like I had been in that space before, with that really like empty. And I don't think it was a matter of like, I felt very alone. I felt like the people that needed to hear me, and it was almost like you feel like you're just screaming for someone to listen to you, that you're not okay, that you need support. And it wasn't there. So at a certain point, you just give up. And it was, I am tired. I have been fighting this for a very long time. I'm like, I can't keep doing this. Like the cycles of like it, and yeah, like mental illness is different for anybody who struggles with it. But for me, it was like the cycles of like, you get hit that like depressive state, you start having those intrusive thoughts and things like that, and then you go and you get like medication or you do something. But I felt like I always just did band-aid fixes and I never ever got better. And so when you keep like bandaging stuff, like then you like put a bandage here and then this starts to spew out, and like you can only really do that for so long. And I think that's what January was like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like I was just so tired. I was so tired. And it's hard to explain that, like, but then I don't really know like what made me decide to stay. It wasn't like this like brilliant, beautiful moment of like, it was like, I was talking, I think it was my therapist, and we were like kind of talking. She's like, you're going to hang up this phone and you're going to phone your doctor and we're going to talk about like medications and stuff, and adjusting that piece of it. So I was like, if I am doing this, I'm doing this, like I'm going to get better. And I don't know what I was thinking that was at that point in time, because you're like, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to get better. Yeah. I'm going to freaking recover. And like, that's going to be,
you got motivated.
I'm like, but I don't know what that looked like, because I have never been there. So
do you think reaching out to your husband was, or like just like vocalizing those thoughts and that struggle, do you think that was a turning point for you that like really opened you up to like being open to healing for the first time?
That was like, that is a very, very hard thing to do, to put it into words. Like it's one thing to have thoughts and have it kind of repeating in your head and like that kind of thing, and like those feelings and stuff, but to vocalize it and actually say like, I think I'm going to end my life, that's big, because those are really big words, you know what I mean? Like that's and I think that like when I said it, it was like that was my last reach out. I think that that's what that was like, some part of me was like, please, like somebody just like just help me, because I don't think I can help myself anymore. So
yeah, I think that's why it's so important that we take these things seriously when somebody is like in that kind of vulnerable state.
If
like
they get to a point of saying it, like
if somebody's telling you something like that, it's like that's a big at least like in my experiences as well, like that is a big like, please help me. Yeah. Right? Because you don't just share those thoughts just willy-nilly to throw it out there.
And it takes a lot to get to, and I mean, if you look at it realistically, a lot of people don't ever get to that point. Yeah. Because it ends there, right? And I think that's why I'm so passionate now about talking about it, because it's not comfortable. I am not comfortable right now. Like talking and saying those things makes it real again, and makes it, it's very emotional to kind of think back there, but I feel like I have to just keep like sharing it, because somebody needs to hear it, I guess, is my whole thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you made the decision to stay, and now you're here and you can share your story, and you know, somebody out there is going to hear it and relate to it, and realize that, you know, there is light on the other side, right? That
there can be, they can. That's kind of my whole, I think the purpose of it now is just like, if you're where I was, like I'm telling you, you can recover, You can do the things, you can take those steps. It just is one decision that you have to make.
Yeah.
And that's choosing yourself.
Yeah.
And I think once that happens, that just kind of changed everything.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. It's just like that decision to choose me. Right. I know that's something we've talked about before where you're like, you know, I just made this choice to like choose Danielle for the first time. Like, what does that mean, first of all?
I didn't know. It was like I was just like, if I'm doing this, I'm doing it right. I'm going to heal. I'm going to deal with my baggage because like you can only carry around your past, your baggage, your crap for so long before it is too heavy. And like a lot of people I think don't ever really try to unpack things. And I've had a lot of different things happen in my life, a lot of good, a lot of not so good. And things needed to be dealt with. So, I mean, that's when I really dove into the healing part of it. I sat with my trauma. I sat with the things that had hurt me. I looked at every single one of my relationships. I had to forgive. I had to forgive myself. I had to forgive other people. Forgiving people that will never apologize is a hard thing to do. So, and it was just that it was like one thing at a time. So it was like one event, one narrative, of like, so one of them would be like, I'm too much was one of them with having like ADHD or stuff. It's like, no, I'm not. And so it was like one little thing at a time and a lot of like inner child stuff. And like, if you ever gone to like therapy or really into like journaling and stuff, writing became a huge thing of that. And I think it was how I was able to release. Like I've always loved writing, and it became like a tool that I had that was able to help me heal. And I shut a lot of people out while I was in this space. I think, and I shared some of that too when we were on the retreat. It was like I couldn't deal with like the friendships or like the other things. I was like bare minimums of what I could actually like focus on. And so while I was kind of working on that stuff, that's when the other pieces started to change. So I had chosen myself and started working with the foundation. And that's when like I started losing weight. And like some things also could be like, well, and the liquor. So that would be another reason why I was never able to reach my fitness goals. So like both of those things kind of changing.
Yeah.
And so that's what I say is like, yes, I lost like 50 pounds and yes, I recovered with my drinking and stuff like that. But those were like side effects, I guess, of me doing the work.
That's so important. And I want to come back to talk a little bit about alcohol and weight loss as well. Because I do think that's more important than we give credit to a lot of time.
Well, we had talked about that many times over the years, and I was like, whatever, Kyle.
So I want to come back to that, but you said something there that really struck a chord with me, which was like forgiving people, including yourself, that will never apologize.
Yeah.
Right. That's really, really powerful, because I think it really speaks to the need to let go of a lot of things. And things that we have no control over.
Yeah.
And like that, I think that's really what it means to like, people always talk about like, I need to go inside. I need to like focus on me and stuff like that. I think that's what it really comes down to, is a level of, I guess, ownership, but also of just letting go of whatever anybody else is going to feel. Like I need to just like focus on like, it's like, just focus on how I'm going through this right now in my life as well, where I'm trying to really not control these external factors of what's happening, but just control like, how did I handle this situation, and can I live with that? Yeah. And if the answer is yes, then I can just like be good, and other things and people are going to stress me out in those situations. But if I can just like be okay and like know that I stuck to my core values and my beliefs and those types of things. Is that kind of what you experienced as well with kind of going inward?
Yeah, it was like during the initial like first part when I had taken the time off work and everything that was going on there, we talked a lot in therapy about like my circle of control and the things that I can control. And that was one thing that when 2022 started, that was initially like my goal for the year, was trying to and give up control of the things that I couldn't, because that's what was bringing on a lot of this like stress. And I think having like the anxiety, and maybe it was part of the struggles with having ADHD that was not diagnosed, but like I felt I had to feel like I had to control whatever I could. And so I tried to control outcomes and people's behaviors and people's perceptions of me. And through this whole process, it comes down to like, I don't care anymore. The only opinion that matters of me now is mine. And then that realization of like all these perceptions that people have of me is their own, and it's their truth. That's fine. But I lived my life based off of that and feeling like the only way I could be validated or happy or anything was like reliant on other people. And so that was one of the biggest lessons for me in this, was just be Danielle, like focus on your shit and just stop worrying about what everybody else, like when it comes down to it, when I'm taking my last breath, it's all going to be on the decisions that I made and how my life unfolded would be me. And so that was this whole thing, is like, if I'm choosing to stay this time, like I need to live, because I didn't feel like I had ever been doing that. And I think that was part of that, like COVID, like poking the holes and everything.
Yeah. It's, like I said before, I guess so powerful to have that realization. I was just reading something the other day, and I was talking about happiness, and I was talking about how, happiness is in you no matter what. So we have all the happiness that we need with us right now. And what happens is we get so clouded with these other things, like worry about judgment, about like what story are other people creating for me, and like all that kind of stuff. And it's like the times when we experience the most happiness is when we've let go of the things that we need to let go of.
I let go of a lot of stuff. I can't even tell you how many times I wrote, like, so I got to a point where I was like, I'm going to write every day. Some days it was like, I'm grateful for, and it was like 3 things. Other days it turned into 8 pages of some event that had happened, some relationship that I have, something that I was letting go of. And some days it was like massive, just like letting, and you're like, oh my God, like, and you could just feel all this like weight coming off, like as I unpacked all of the baggage and the everything, and just because I was like, I'm gonna do this and like just do me, right? Like, so now I'm like, I have to be authentic, and that was always a value, but I think it got clouded with being my authentic self and then being the self that I thought people wanted me to be. I viewed that as authentic, which wasn't. And
I think that's how we get to that authentic version of, at least that's what I'm learning in life, is, the more I let go of the external, the more it actually allows you, because it's such a hard thing where we go like, when people ask you like, well, who are you? Or when you ask yourself that question of like, who am I really? Like, what is that authentic? You see people sometimes and you're like, man, that person is so real. Like, they're just so themselves. Like, I always tell people like, my daughter's like that. Like, I'll look at her, I'm like, she's just like so like herself, and she doesn't care, and she like knows it and she owns it. I'm like, I wish I could do that. But I think that's where it comes from. It's like letting go of these external opinions, these, potential stories. Like, we create stories of other people's stories for us. Like, I'll like sit here and I'll be like, this is the story I imagine that person is saying about me. It's like,
I had that literally. I saw someone I hadn't seen since high school, and I was talking about like, oh yeah, like I think I used the word ditzy, and the person was like, I never saw you as that. I just thought you were really outgoing. And I was like, huh,
Yeah.
interesting.
I know.
So there's a lot of realizations of like, maybe I told myself this and believed it, that other people were thinking this, or of like, if I doubt myself, then everybody must doubt me because, right? So
I also just had a conversation with somebody. I hadn't seen them in like 10 years or something, and we were talking, and they said something about like, yeah, back then I was like, I think they said they like had very little confidence. And I was like, that's funny, because like when I saw you back then, like I thought you were like so confident. Like I had this perception of you being so confident, and we just had like laughed about it, because we're like, it's so funny, these like our perception of ourselves and like what other people's perception of us, and then at the end of the day, like none of that matters, because all that matters is that that person had a journey towards growth, whereas like now they feel more confident in themselves, and now they're in a better place, right?
Yeah. I mean, so we were talking about like the side effects, right? So with the alcohol, and the eating and stuff, it was more like, as I dealt with those things, it was the realization that I used food and alcohol to cope with everything, and to just kind of push it back down.
Like numbs it almost.
Yeah. And my therapist said something to me, because like I always talked badly of like, I can't believe I like drank so much, or like all these bad like coping mechanisms. She's like, you need to give them their space, and you need to have gratitude for the fact that they got you to where you're at, because whether it was unhealthy or not, she's like, you always have to respect the ways that you coped to get to where you are, because they were your survival. She's like, because you wouldn't be here if you hadn't have used those. And I'm like, huh, very interesting. So instead of looking at it negative,
it's a freeing thing, right? To say like, maybe like it actually did serve me at that time, but it's no longer, like you get to a place where like, it's no longer serving me. Like it's the same thing with, you can be angry in a situation, right? It might not, like, it might serve you in a moment to like have that anger, because it's important to feel the feelings. But like it gets to a point where you're like, okay, this anger is no longer serving me, because it's, you know, either creating negative situations. It no longer aligns with like who I want to be or who I feel like I am, those types of things. Like, but you're right, all those things, like they do serve their purpose.
They do. And a lot of it was like protecting myself too, right? But a thing that I struggled with too is like, I was always known as like the fun Danielle, or like, we talked about this too, but like the partying piece of it, and like always, because that's when I was like let loose and like not, I don't know. But then it was like, I'm not that person anymore. So then there's that fear. I'm like, are people still gonna like me? Are people, am I boring now? Like, do people, because people just got used to seeing that part of me, but what they didn't realize was like that part of me was very broken. And very, just very sad. And so it was just,
Were there people, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm curious, were there people that when you made that change to like maybe not being that same version of yourself as much, I'm curious if there's a realization of like people that you maybe had to like let go of, or just limit yourself from, because it's like, yes, they do appreciate that version of me, but only that version of me.
Well, and honestly, they never knew the other side of that. Like there was never a situation where there was alcohol where I wasn't partaking. There was like, I had to really learn about boundaries as part of that, because like I had kind of touched on that earlier, like there was certain relationships and things that I had to like separate stuff, and part of it was the social piece of it. And I think that impacted Matt a lot, because I was like always wanting to like go out and do the things, and then all of a sudden I like never wanted to go anywhere. And it wasn't because, it was just because I didn't want to put myself in a situation. Because and it's still, every time I go out somewhere, I have to be very conscious about my alcohol intake. Because like do think that in a sense I was an alcoholic, and I will always have that, because I know I just don't have that control with alcohol, because of the way that the relationship that I had with it.
Yeah.
But I had to there was some boundaries that I had to put up, and people that I couldn't talk to anymore, or just had to separate for a time kind of thing. But like my people, they're still there. So whether or not I like disappeared for a few months while I was doing my stuff, and there was quite a bit that came up with like in a lot of my friendships and stuff too, which was one that was significantly impacted, because I didn't have anything. Well, we say you can only work on a few parts of you. So I was working on like myself and like my mental health and my physical health, like that kind of thing. I didn't have the energy to put into my relationships or the career piece or whichever it was. So now I'm getting back to that. But that was part of it too, was just having to just make those. And that was hard too, because some people, like, if you get all of a sudden cut out, you don't really know what you've done. And if there was no, like, no specific event or anything that, like, triggered it, it's like, what did I do?
Well, and you're not sharing, like, your, like, deepest struggles with everybody either. And so it's hard because, like, I've had that happen with me before as well. I always just go back to my own experiences. But you almost feel, like, guilty because you're like, well, I'm not telling them why I'm acting the way that I'm acting, but then I just feel guilty for like cutting them out. But it's again one of those things we just like have to let go of for ourselves. It's like either they're gonna understand or they're not gonna understand, and that's out of my control. And I'm not gonna lie, like there was points where I was like, is Matt still gonna love because I'm a very different person, and he has never known the healed, like, stable version of Danielle. He's always known the rest of it. And like the drinking and stuff was always a huge thing in our marriage too, because he had to pick up the slack every time, whether it was with the kids or whichever, like that kind of thing. He just always knew that like he'd have to be the sober one always. It was just that way. So now I did have fears, because I was like, well, I might end up single after this too, but like, but he is still there. So different relationship now. Like so, first of all, I think it's interesting because you mentioned how like, well, he never knew that version of me. I'm curious, like, did you ever know that version of you either?
No.
Right. So it's
I'm
like
getting to know her.
Yeah.
She's kind of cool. I like her. She's a little bit badass. Yeah. It's like the first time in my life I've been advocating for myself, and I think, and like, I'm like, I got to share my story, because there's a lot of people that I talked to in the process. And it was interesting because it was almost like people picked up on, if they were going through a similar thing, they could almost pick up on the energy, because I had people coming that I hadn't talked to in like years, and like people from various points in my life, but like similar stories. And like same thing, was like started working, like it was like that unraveling after COVID, and then they started working on themselves, and then all of a sudden like a bunch of weight gets lost, and I'm seeing it happening with multiple people. So it's like I'm onto something, because it starts inside, I think, is where, because I spent my entire adult life trying to lose weight. I was always dieting. I was always on some sort of program, but I never cut out the alcohol or anything, so I never actually reached like any of the goals that I had. So so
the alcohol was, you feel, a pretty significant piece to that?
I think so, because I just never was able to give it up. I just never really saw it as like an issue until after you step out of it and you're like, interesting.
And I think too, like once you start doing the underground or like that foundational healing that we were talking about too, then you start to realize the impact that it has too, like mentally, not just like calorie wise and towards
mentally,
your weight,
for
but
sure.
And I think it's when, what I've noticed with working with people on, various different struggles through weight loss and stuff, is when you start to tap into those things, then you start to see how the food is affecting you. Then you start to see how the alcohol is affecting you, or the stress is affecting you. But until then, if you're just trying to like attack it at a surface level, like it's just so hard to make any real lasting change.
Because you're not, it's like you have to find the root of the problem. And that was me. Like that was my stuff and things that I just had been ignoring forever. Because you're like, well, when I get this promotion, I'll be happy. Or when this happens, then I'll feel happy. And then you get all those things and you're like, there's something else. There's something that's missing. Yeah. And when I stopped drinking, when I do drink now, it crazy impacts my mental health. Like, and I never ever realized that because I didn't not drink long enough to ever realize that. And I'm like, holy crap. Like if I have, let's say 4 drinks, which is minimal compared to what I would used to have, but that's literally like all I can have now because I don't have the same
tolerance.
Nope. I think between the weight loss and the not drinking part, I am like a 2-drink person now, and that's about it. But like the next day, my anxiety's through the roof. I feel like I've done something like wrong. It's like people call it like the alcohol scaries or something like that, and it's like this. You're actually anxious, and like if you can't, I have trouble remembering things regularly, so the alcohol doesn't help that. And you're like, oh my God, what did I do? Like, it's just, I'm like, this is not worth it. And sometimes I get really sad the next day and I'm like, I don't like that.
Do you think that's because it's tied to like a version of yourself that you're trying to steer away from? I think there's a little bit of that. But I think it actually impacts your mental health. And like, for sure it does. Yeah. But it's funny because that's usually the first thing that people go to cope with mental health. Yeah. And I actually just recently had a conversation with somebody about cannabis too. It's similar, where cannabis has, this is a pharmacist that I was talking to, but we were talking about how cannabis is good for stress, right? Like it's supposed to relieve your stress and stuff. And they were saying to me, well, actually, like cannabis is like similar to alcohol in the sense of like it will make you feel like less stress. It'll like calm your nerves in the short term. But more and more studies are now showing that in the long term, cannabis actually increases your stress. It actually increases your anxiety. So like the use of it, you feel better that night. Maybe you sleep better. Yeah. That type of thing. But there are studies that are now starting to come out that are showing that it actually, like alcohol, in the long term, it can actually have like an increase in stress, an increase in anxiety. Obviously it's very like situational and like depends on the strains and stuff like that, but it's an interesting thing because we do think it's like we go to all these band-aid things, which is fine. Sometimes they serve their purpose. They do serve their purpose, like we talked about, but it is something that people need to be aware of. It's like you can't just rely on those things because it's just going to lead to like more problems, bigger problems down the line most of the time until we've done that work that like what you're talking about. And I mean it was a lot of work, and it was my number one focus. It's a lot of work. It's but like if I could give advice to anybody, it is so worth it. And that's kind of what I talked about at the beginning of the year. It was like I am so grateful that I decided to like have that was like a rebellious act of self-love of just choosing me, because that's where it started. It was like, if I'm going to do this, like, let's do this. And so now it's like, I have completely realigned with like what my beliefs and values are. I said this to my doctor. I was like, he's like, how do you feel? Because we were talking about like medications. And I mean, I was going once a month, right? And I'm like, I feel stable. And I can honestly say I have never said that in my entire life. Yeah. I have never felt that. Because when, like, if you know about ADHD at all, like, it's a lot of noise in the head. So, like,
to live your whole life like that and then reach a point with the help of like therapy, medications, and everything else that I've been doing to get to a point where I just feel stable and peace. Like I have a sense of peace inside now that I've never had. And I just like, I would do this all over again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was a lot of work. But I just, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about speaking and sharing my story and talking about my journey and stuff, because I think that there are a lot of people right now that are like, everybody's situation is different, but I think there's a lot of people right now that are struggling. You can talk to any mental health professional, like it is a problem. There is so much. And so I just feel almost a sense of desperation of like, I need to share this as much as I can and advocate as much as I can, because people are losing their lives, and that's a big deal. Yeah. So that's kind of what led me to this.
Yeah.
So
no, it's awesome, and I'm so happy for you, and you look amazing.
Thank you.
Not just because of the weight loss, but like you look happy. Mm-hmm. You look stable. You look like somebody who is thriving and enjoying their life right now, and so it's really cool to see that.
Thank you.
And I want to talk a little bit about Anxious Alice as well, because that's another way that I love any kind of like apparel that has a message behind it. Like the Day One Dad's hat that I'm wearing, it has a message behind it. It has a purpose and impact behind it. I'm wearing one of your lines as well. Can you talk a little bit about Anxious Alice and what you're doing with that?
Yeah. So Anxious Alice was kind of born through this whole journey. Alice is actually what I refer to my mental illness as, kind of like a Alice in Wonderland kind of vibe. But it was that decision to separate it from me. So my anxiety and depression are something that I live with and I have to work with. But Alice does not define who I am. So it's like the tiger of grief that we were talking about, right? It's like it's always there. You know that Alice is kind of in the background. You learn ways to kind of work with her and exist with her, but in a healthier way. So, and honestly, sometimes it just helps. Like if the anxiety is creeping in, I'm like, not today, Alice. Like, go away. Yeah. We're not dealing with this. So I was early last year, around like March, I started wearing advocacy apparel because I was trying to do that like silent advocacy because I didn't have the confidence to be like shout it from the rooftops yet. But I was already feeling like people are not okay. And so I started wearing things that said like mental health matters and that kind of thing. And then noticed the attention that it was getting. And I was like, I think there's something here. And I was like, I want to, like my big goal, right, is I want to be a mental health advocate. I want to be a known advocate in my community. I want to be that person that like when I was in those dark moments, that like one person that was like, you can do this. This is where you start. Like, you're not alone. Mm-hmm. Like, you've got this. Being that person or that light for somebody when you're in a really dark place, that was kind of like, if I can do that by wearing a shirt, like a simple message, right? And that's kind of where Anxious Alice came from. So I was like, I'm going to start doing apparel. So I did some designs. I had launched in July with like a handful of things. I donate a portion. So every item that I sell, I donate a portion of that to Canadian Mental Health. So I actually reached out to them and they created a fundraiser page for me. So I have a little Anxious Alice page.
Amazing.
So my first goal is to raise $1,000 because that's just me, right? Yeah. So last year, at the end of the year, we were at $246. But when I made that donation, they were actually matching it. So it's actually like just under $500 that we've donated so far. So I've got a little tracker on there. So it shows the $250, but I know that it was double that. So But that's kind of my first big goal. And then with the rescue that I work with, I had talked to some of their big advocates in the organization and noticing and talking more about like the connection with dogs and mental health and some advocacy pieces for dogs. Like I have a shirt about like muzzles, and so there are and like anxious dogs and that kind of thing. So just kind of bringing light to the fact that like dogs can have anxiety too, and like that kind of thing. So with the line that I created, I donate a portion of that to Pause for Change. So
awesome.
Yeah, so it's good. I love it. I've done a few writing pieces. The podcast was the next big thing. So that's kind of it. Now I'm just kind of reaching out and trying to find ways to share my story, because I feel like somebody can take something from it, and maybe if it helps somebody else decide to stay, then I won, right?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Where can people find like you have a website?
I do have a website.
And I know you just started a blog recently too.
Yeah. So anxiousalice.ca. I'm very excited about that. So that's where the blog is right now. I also have links to my Instagram, which is Anxious Alice Co. And same with Etsy. I'm the only one. So you can find me pretty easily on there. And then, yeah. So
awesome. Well, we'll link that in the show notes so people can find it. So if you guys are interested in checking it out, you got some really cool designs. Then I know you got some cool stuff coming up as well. So definitely follow along and go and check it out and buy some apparel, support some good causes. And
be an advocate.
Be an advocate yourself just by wearing the stuff, right?
You never know who. I think one thing I've learned is like you never know who's watching. You never know who needs to hear what you have to say or to read what it says, right? Because someone could just read that and be like, oh, she gets it.
Yeah.
Or he gets it, right?
Not alone. Yeah. Yeah.
Powerful.
Totally. Is there anything on this episode that we haven't touched on that you wanted to touch on? Or do you feel like we've checked all the boxes?
I feel like, I don't know. I feel like we've talked about
all
a lot
of
it.
Yeah.
I don't think there is anything else.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story. I know you're passionate about sharing your story, but I also know as somebody who's also passionate about sharing stories that it's not always easy.
No.
It is.
I didn't cry though. So I was worried the whole way here. I was like, it's because I could feel it a couple times. I'm like, nope, we're not going to cry on this. We're good.
Yeah. No, you did awesome. You did awesome. But yeah, it is. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to put yourself out there to an audience as well. But I just know that somebody out here is going to be listening or watching, and they're going to be positively impacted by your story. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you. And thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Yeah. And thank you to everybody for listening and watching. And we'll see you in the next episode.